Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 189 of the Dynasty Junkies podcast, a proud member of the Dynasty Addicts Podcast Network, or the DAP Network, if you will. This is a fun one for us tonight. You've got me on the main mic tonight, Andrew Hall at Andrew Hall FF. Scott will be joining us shortly. He's had some family issues that have taken him a minute, as I'm sure all of you can understand with families. It's not always the perfect timing situation, but he'll be here in a little bit. But in the meantime, we've got the one and only Pat Fitzmaurice from Fantasy Pros. How you doing tonight, Pat?
Doing great, Andrew. Always nice to join my tag team partner in the Kings Classic
That's right.
League, an industry league that always drafts at the Fantasy Football Expo at the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And Andrew and I combined, it's actually two leagues in one, an
Yeah.
auction and a snake draft. And we kind of tag team the drafts, and you're managing the auction team, I'm managing the snake, and so far so good, I guess. We're 1-1 and
Yeah.
overcame 0-1 starts, so I'm optimistic.
I'm happy with it as well. And I think that there is something to be said too for doing two drafts. I don't think I could do that myself. I'm glad that I'm teamed up. I think that was an arduous task to get all that done, and now to manage the teams and to kind of keep an eye on things. It's nice to only have one league to worry about in a way, and to kind of not have to worry about the 14 team leagues with the who's who in the fantasy industry taking us down. So it's a pleasure and an honor to be partnered with you on that. Hopefully we can make some noise as we get on the stretch here. I think a lot of teams though are 1-1. And that kind of brings us to what I would consider our basic topic for the night. And we can kind of just jump right into it almost. We'll talk about the injuries as we talk about this topic because it all kind of relates. But how much should we be reacting to the first 2 weeks of data? And so with that in mind, I think that's a perfect segue in a sense. And again, Pat, you and I both write for Fantasy Pros. That's why we're teamed up on this for the Kings Classic. I know that you've got a lot of experience in Dynasty, a lot of experience in fantasy. I don't want to make it too obvious, I guess, but how would you rank this on one of the, in the top 2 weeks of the season? Is this like your worst ever first 2 weeks? Like, it's up there for me. Like, this has been the most chaotic, the most crazy, the least amount of passing, the least predictable. Like, where are you at with these first couple of weeks so far of the season?
Yeah, pretty crazy. And as an example of that, Andrew, like in the Fantasy Pros accuracy contest, like normally week 2, I'd say, has traditionally been one of my better weeks because a lot of people, most years, people sort of overreact, in my opinion, to some of the stuff that goes down in week 1. And I just kind of stay the course and sort of stay true to my initial reads on a lot of the stuff and go with that in week 2. And like normally it sort of works out in my favor, and that's been a good week for me this year. No, not at all. I had a disastrous week 2. Stuff went even more haywire than it went in week 1. And so this has been on a scale of craziness, 1 to 10, 10 being the craziest, I'd say like probably a good 8.5 so far.
I was thinking the same. Yeah, like 8.7. I mean, it could be worse. It could be crazier. But this season has not started at all like I expected. And I don't feel like it's not me, it's you, right? And by you, I mean fantasy, right? Like, it wasn't like anything that I did differently. It was just the football gods are being chaotic right now. Like, it was a full moon this past weekend. We had a Friday the 13th in there. Like, I just feel like we're in this weird, odd start of the season that has made it very, very frustrating, not just for us in the analyst business and the people that kind of quote unquote do this for a living, right? But also casual fans that are just trying to have fun with this. It's really hard to have fun when you're getting your butt whooped every week. And it's really hard to have fun when there are so many injuries, which is kind of the news, I guess, in a sense. And a broader stroke is we've had, I think, more injuries, it feels like, than usual, but I say that every year. And so I wonder if there is more injuries or if it's just because it's the recency bias or what have you. But I know in my longtime home keeper league, I'm staring down the barrel of 1-1 in that league. And my first round pick was AJ Brown. My second round pick was Puka Nacua. I'm doing a nice little collar pull on this one. You know what I mean? Like, oh my goodness, what have I got to do to turn this around? And I think, again, a lot of players are staring at this and saying, well, I drafted Christian McCaffrey. Now he's not playing. And, Travis Kelce, where are you? And Sam Laporta, where are you? And Joe Burrow, where are you? And Pat Mahomes, where are you? Like, it's like the who's who of nobody's performing. I guess in a general sense, I know you've probably, and you said this a little bit ago, but I know you've probably seen the same thing. But I mean, do you think this is going to turn around, or is this the start of a new weird trend that we're going to have to kind of lean into this year?
Yeah, I mean, the passing numbers, that is the big thing that kind of slaps you across the face, Andrew, just the overall
Yeah.
reduction in the passing numbers. And um, we know that football has always been sort of a game of punch and counterpunch with the offensive and defensive coordinators going to war against each other. And the cover two sort of has taken away like the deep downfield passing attack, or at least diminished its effectiveness. And I think we are starting to see the offensive coordinators counterpunch by just going old school and running the ball. And
Yeah.
it's kind of amusing to me because I know um, 7, 8 years ago, maybe some like even pretty sharp people in the fantasy industry were just, any offensive coordinator who wants to run the ball as a square. And, why do we even need to run the ball? And like passing is the more efficient way to go. Do we really need to run? But you do need to run. It's like a deterrence thing, like,
Yep.
yes, there are more yards averaged per pass than per run, but I mean, you do need the run to set up the pass and vice versa. Like
Yep.
you're not going to be effective being one dimensional in the NFL. And I think now people are finding it. NFL offenses are finding it a little easier to attack on the ground and a little harder to attack through the air. So, yeah, I mean, this is the new landscape, and it's kind of it runs counter to those of us who have embraced the zero running back strategy, the hero running back strategy.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, running backs are where it's at again, and I'm sitting here stuck wondering what happened to my Amari Cooper and Terry McLaurin and Deontay
Yeah.
Johnson shares.
All those plans just fall to the wayside, right? I think too. This is the type of the year. This is the type of season, I guess, where the men get separated from the boys a little bit too, though, right? There's a lot to be said for holding your ground and sticking to your guns and kind of knowing who to trust and what to trust and all these other things. But there's also some value in pivoting and knowing when it is time to change and like looking at that and saying, okay, well, what do we know? Obviously, one data point, 1 week, there's really not a lot of trends you can get from one data point. But with 2 data points, you can start to build a line. And even if you say to yourself, like, well, these may both be outliers. Well, more outliers is not as likely as just a downtrend, right? If you have enough outliers, isn't that now the trend? And so for players like, for instance, like Travis Kelce and Sam Laporta and Mark Andrews and like some of these other guys at tight end, for instance, we're just seeing what I thought was going to be a good year for tight ends, where I thought we had the most depth ever. Nope, rug got pulled out from under us again on that one, and now we're staring at 3 good tight ends, and one of them's Isaiah Likely, which is just what the hell. And I don't even know if he's really good, right? That's the catch. Like I think what we're doing here is trying to figure out what we should be reacting to. Generally speaking, I like to think of reactions as like let's hold and kind of what you said, like let's just wait and see. Let's be a little patient. I don't mind being patient through 1 week. I don't mind being patient through 2 weeks, but sometimes, my brain starts itching after 3 weeks, right? So what are you looking for this week to maybe make that noise into signal again? Like, what are you looking at kind of in terms of these quote unquote trends that we're starting to see? Which one of those, what would it take, I guess, for that to be the trend and not the noise?
Oh man, in terms of the macro stuff,
Yeah, and like passing in general, or in terms of like touchdowns being down, and like it just seems like overall production is down. If that happens again this week, is that just the NFL we're living in now?
yeah, I mean, maybe we do see like 1 week where all of a sudden the scoring just goes bonkers, and I felt like we did get a lot of points last week. We just didn't necessarily get the booming yardage totals
Yeah.
behind it. It seemed like there were an ample number of touchdowns
Yep.
last week, but yeah, I just are we going to see more 300-yard passers and more 100-yard receivers? Like that's kind of what I'm looking for.
I'm hoping.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I guess what my answer to that, Andrew, is I do feel like the shortened preseason has made for a slower start for the offenses because only 3 games now. A lot of teams just completely shut it down and never really play their starters at all. Some
Yeah.
some do the kind of, quarter and a half audition, the dress rehearsal. But really, like, it's gotten to the point where the preseason is basically meaningless, where
Yeah.
it's always
The
been
offenses don't
meaningless.
want to show anything, right?
Yeah, that's kind of it. And so I feel like the defenses start well ahead of the offenses. And like in week one, I tested that theory. I bet the under on every game. And I thought that was a great bet, considering that I think in week one of 2023, the average point total was 41 points.
Yeah.
And if you took out the Chargers Dolphins game where there were 70 points, it would have been like 39.1. And this week or this year, when I did that, I only won, I think, either 6 or 7 of the 16 games. And it was weird because weren't a lot of yards, but there were a lot of points.
Yeah.
And but yeah, I still feel like the defenses are ahead right now. And when do the offenses maybe catch up, if at all? Like I do think maybe the offenses get it going at some point, but we haven't hit that point yet. Maybe it's week 3, maybe it's week 4.
No, and I'm right there with you. I think there was a lot of players we didn't expect scoring points. So it wasn't like fantasy lineups were blowing up, but there were definitely points on the field. I feel like we had a little bit more of the random, fumbles and defensive touchdowns, which I always kind of like that little bit of chaos. It just feels like the chaos is now becoming the trend. And if chaos is the trend, then it's not chaos, right? Like that the definition of chaos is kind of going against the grain. Well, that may be the grain now. And I know, too, for a lot of people that listen to this, we're Dynasty players. I know you've been playing Dynasty for a long time. How many years have you been playing Dynasty, actually? Let's just kind of recap that in case people aren't familiar with your work or what you do.
Oh, man. Trying to think of when my first Dynasty would have been. Maybe like 8, 9 years ago. 8 or 9.
Okay. That
Yeah.
checks. No, and I've been playing fantasy for a while, but just started Dynasty about 6 years ago. Or 7 now. Yeah, it all blurs together. Point I'm getting at, I guess, is I've seen some things, right? And I know you've seen some things, and there are some weird things that happen in Dynasty where I know, for instance, there was a team that I had that came in second last year. I was very happy about it. I'm like, hey, I did pretty well, but I am bringing everybody back, right? I don't really have any players aging out. I feel like my team was right in the prime of contention, and it's a team that it does double headers every week. So it's kind of, instead of going against the median, you just get 2 matchups, which is great. And so then what I'm actually looking at now is I'm 0-4 after 2 weeks. And I'm like, because I got Josh Allen, I got Dak Prescott, and I can't get it done. It's just not working. So I blew it up and I started making some crazy trades. It's a contract league run by Ryan McDowell, who we're all a fan of. It's Kitchen Sink, which is a great kind of league. It's got everything in the world in it. And I was just like, the first one to rebuild is usually the one who gets the best prices and can get the most value. And I'm like, you know what? I came in second. I'm not necessarily playing with house money, but I feel like I did what I needed to do. And if I tank early enough, maybe I can get a good spot next year and turn this around in a way. So I kind of was just like looking at the logic and just going, you know what? Maybe that's the answer here. I don't usually do that after 2 weeks, though, right? Like it feels like that's way too early. But when the double headers are playing in and I'm 0-4 and, stacking against a good team, I'm like, you know what? Let's try. It's for fun. It's for fun. Let's just have fun with this. And sometimes the most fun leagues that I'm in are the ones where I'm not winning. As odd as that may sound, I love winning. Don't get me wrong. But yeah. I think if you can have fun in a league where, you're rebuilding can be a ton of fun. And this is the perfect kind of season to do that, because you've got your pick of the litter when it comes to injured players or underproducing players. And, you might have someone on your roster like J.K. Dobbins and you're thinking, I don't want him on my team, but he's like running back 3 right now or something. You know what I mean? Like, that's just nuts. Why not trade him for something and see what I can get? You might have Jordan Mason on your dynasty roster. He was never supposed to be paying off this soon, right? Maybe you can flip him for something crazy. So again, I think there's a lot of this going on right now that is a really prime time to be a rebuilder and a terrifying time to be a contender. Because if you're contending right now, you kind of have to go, am I contending? Like, is this fool's gold? Like, do I really have it? So I guess I'm just curious on that contending rebuilding side. Like, are you making that kind of a reaction yet? Or are you still holding off to decide if you're going to pivot?
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think right now I am at, I had a couple teams where I peaked. I'm rebuilding with more teams than I'm contending with right now, which, not great overall,
Happens sometimes. Yeah.
But you're right. What you said about feeling more comfortable as a rebuilder, almost like,
Oh yeah.
yeah, it's I don't know, almost a relief in a way.
I
Go
love
for it.
not contending when seasons start like this because I'm just like watching the chaos happen. I'm just watching the world burn and laughing because I don't really care about points, you know.
Exactly.
The twist there too, though, is as a rebuilder, I know I've got one team that I thought I was rebuilding, and I'm 2-0, and I'm like, well, like maybe I pivot to a contender. You know, I've got those first two wins, and I didn't really deserve it. I don't know if I should try, but it's like, well, I'm 2-0. I mean, my team is doing well. Maybe this is the start of something new, and maybe I can pivot that around. You know, there's a league where I thought I'd be rebuilding, and after week one, I traded for Puka, and now I'm like, well, maybe I can actually contend if I flip that for more assets. And it's like, it's just one of those things where as long as you stay liquid, which is generally our rule of thumb in fantasy and dynasty, especially, as long as you stay liquid, I think you're going to have fun with it anyway. And you're going to find a way to make it fun. You're going to find a way to make, you know, winning happen. You're going to find a way to make things change and move around. And I think that's really where the reactions that I'm having are like, well, what are we doing all of this for? It's to have fun. So as long as you're having fun, you're probably going to be just fine. There are definitely some people that take things very serious and take it a little bit too far and get a little bit too upset. I used to be one of those. When I only had a couple of leagues, I would really live and die by my fantasy teams, and it would kind of wreck my day. I always say to people too, like if you get overly reactionary to your team, add more teams, and you'll realize very quickly that it just doesn't matter as much. It all kind of comes out in the wash. That being said, when all of your teams lose, that is a very different feeling, and it still can drive you a little batty. But when you see it happen on a macro scale, you kind of throw your arms up and go, "Well, there's nothing I could do." You know what I mean? Like I'm just at the whims of this. And I think sometimes it helps to be reminded the chaos is why we do this, right? If it was overly predictable and you knew going in that the projections were your scores, how boring would that game be? Right? Like, what's
Right.
even the point? Like, you would just lock it in, you draft your team, and you know who won. Like, that sounds, I don't want to play that. That sounds bad. So, as much as the chaos can be annoying, I like to just kind of look at the upside and say, well, hey, we're just getting more of it and earlier than we thought. Like, we're just getting what we asked for. That's all this is. You know what I mean? Does that make sense to you, Pat?
Oh, it absolutely does. Yeah, so much of what you said just makes perfect sense. And I think we during the off season we overestimate the predictability of the NFL and think we've
Yeah.
got a handle on things, and we're just blown apart in week one every year.
Yeah.
And just yeah, I mean, like we study this stuff and we think we know which way it's going to go, and then we're just always torn into a thousand pieces in week
Yeah.
one. And
All the planning in the world and it just falls apart in 12 hours on Sunday. You know what I mean? Like it's just
amazing.
it's wild how that can happen, right? But I also think that there are a lot of people I'm sure out there that are, you know, quote unquote panicking and they're kind of getting upset or frustrated and I'm here to just tell you take a breath. It's going to be all right. You know, your team is not as bad as your record. You know, you're not bad just because your team is losing, right? But process over results. I know we say that a lot on this show. You know, the only way to get out of a bad trade is to make a good trade. Well, if your team is doing terrible, pivot to rebuild. Just have fun with it. If your team is doing badly and you still think you have a chance, pivot to a contender. You know, there's nothing about 0-2 that makes you out of the league. And I know you kind of mentioned this before where you were talking about preseason. And as a Bengals fan, an unabashed Bengals fan, Bengals are notorious for not playing their starters in the preseason. And the last 5 years were 1-9 in the first 2 weeks of the season.
Mm.
So the Bengals always start slow every single year, and it's frustrating every single year. But as long as Burrow stays healthy, which he's done a couple of times now, and one of those times they went to the Super Bowl after going 0-2. So it's like there's a possibility here that you got to keep the hope alive. It's only 2 weeks. Now, granted, there are, you know, only 18 weeks, I guess, or, you know, in the NFL regular season, which means there may only be 17 weeks in your entire season, which means there may only be 14 weeks in your regular season. So we're a seventh of the way through your regular season. That can get a little scary when you think of it in those terms, right? But also remember, everyone else is going to have to deal with the chaos too. It's not just your team that is dealing with the chaos. There are teams in your league that shouldn't be winning, and they're winning, and they're not sure what to do with that. There are teams in your league that haven't paid attention for the entire offseason and are coming back and going, hey, I'm 2-0, and my team must be good. You might be able to go fleece them on a trade right now. You know, so like just look at where you can make some changes to your team. You know, you've got injuries to guys like Puka Nacua and AJ Brown, as I was talking about before, and, you know, Christian McCaffrey. Like those guys you might be able to get at a discount if somebody's just fed up with the chaos and just, damn it, I need points. You know, you might be able to make a trade like Tony Pollard for Christian McCaffrey right now. I mean, I would never recommend anybody sell McCaffrey for that, but I definitely would recommend somebody selling Pollard. I think that there's still some value there. And again, that's where you have to start making the pivots in your brain. That's the reactions I'm talking about, right? Like, let's not panic. Let's not get upset. Let's not go crazy here. There's still some time to make your season fun. I know too, in Dynasty especially, it's the long game. You're supposed to be looking at, a 3 to 5 year window. Yeah, you want to win now, but put your team together so that you can withstand these kinds of things. Anything else in the terms of reactionary or kind of how you're attacking this reactionary time of year when you're getting, I'm sure, a lot of questions from people? Anything else you want to bring up here?
Yeah, that's self-assessment is a good thing to do, and just being honest with yourself. And sometimes you might look at your 0-2 roster and realize that your team is actually pretty good. I mean, I was just interacting with one of our users in Discord, a woman actually, and she was like, she's 0-2 and she's freaking out, like, what should I do? What should I do? And I'm like looking at her roster, and her roster's great.
Yeah.
Like, her roster is fantastic, just like has had a run of bad luck, but like it's a championship looking roster. I'm like, just leave it alone.
Yeah.
Don't worry about, I know you want to like get under the hood and start fixing things when you're 0-2, but like there's nothing to fix here. You've just gotten unlucky.
Bingo. And I
And
think that's where I'm looking at it too. Yeah.
yeah,
Just focus. Just
but
calm.
at
Yeah.
the same time, you can be 2-0 and you can be sort of living a lie with a fraudulent team and maybe be just too like, wrapped up in the undefeated record to like realize that, you're going to be taking on water soon.
Yeah. Well, and that's something else, I guess, when you're talking about self-assessment, like, does it feel fluky? Like, take an honest, unbiased look at it. Take a look at it from the outside and say, is this 0-2 record really an 0-2 record, or did I just lose by 6 points to some really fluky things? Is my 2-0 team really a contender? Like, does this team really have what it takes? Those are the kind of questions I think we should be asking anyway, but especially after a chaotic couple of weeks like we've seen. That's a great point for sure. We do have Matthew Wiggins in the chat. I know he's in, I think, Dynasty Junkies 2 with us. He put up a question here, which I think is a good one. I sold J.K. Dobbins for Spears, yay or nay? I mean, I get it. I would like to get more than Spears, but maybe that's the best price. What do you think, Pat?
It's really interesting. I mean, going into the season 2 weeks ago, I would have said that he fleeced whoever he made that deal with. So I kind of like Matthew's thinking. I do think at some point Spears is going to get more run than he's been getting lately. And, we know Dobbins is probably just like, when is the injury coming?
Yeah.
I mean, like, I'd love to see the guy get through a full season. I
Oh,
would
yeah.
love that. And, maybe it happens. Players are injury prone until they weren't,
Yeah.
until they aren't. Christian McCaffrey was, and then all of a sudden, like, he's been really, I don't know. Like,
Well, he was injury prone and then he
he
wasn't, and
was,
then he is
yeah,
again. Yeah,
exactly,
he's
exactly.
kind of a
Bad
weird case of
example.
both.
Bad example. I was going to bring up Keenan Allen as another example, who got hurt a lot
Same
early
here.
in his career, but all of a sudden, looks like he might be turning injury prone again. So yeah, I don't hate that deal at this point. You feel like maybe with the hot Dobbins start, maybe Matthew could have held out for a little more, but I don't know. Like, I don't mind that deal at all.
No, and he put in here too, he's productive struggle, which makes it even better in my mind. I
Sure.
think Spears is probably going to have a much longer lifespan. And I say much longer, like I know how long, but also like he's younger, he's on a different offense that I think is going to be splitting and saving carries. I think Dobbins has really seen a heavy workload to start the season. And I think there's a lot of people that just do the stat line scouting and kind of just look at the box scores. And I'm one of those too, a lot of the time when I'm busy and don't have time to watch game film. And I'm just kind of looking, well, he got 12 touches. That's important. But when you look at Dobbins, I feel like his production over expectation is just off the charts. He's just doing things crazy. He's getting touchdowns from way far out. And I that's not sticky. And so I think this is a prime time to sell Dobbins. So I love that logic of getting somebody like a Spears was great. Yeah, I mean, I would like to get more, but you can't always do that. You got to take what you can get, right? And that might have been something too. I've seen a couple of these trades that get put to my inbox, and I'm like, I got to accept that before the guy changes his mind. You know what I mean? Like, right. I'll say yes to that. That's close enough for me. Because again, like you said 2 weeks ago, you'd be happier than a pig and slop to get Spears in exchange for Dobbins, right?
Yeah.
Like, let's slow down for a minute. Like, do I really want to nitpick and get a third on top of that? Not really sure it matters. Like, I think we're okay either way.
Yeah. Well said.
Yeah, it's a fun time of year, and we do have the one and only Scott Sidlow joining us tonight. Scott, thank you so much for being here. Always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thanks for making time for us, sir.
Hello, gentlemen, and Andrew, of course.
Thank you.
What's up, Scott? How are you?
Good to see you, buddy. I'm glad we could outnumber our Ohio friend here.
Finally,
so 2-1 in favor of Illinois now.
Yeah, I'll actually be in Chicago next week too for work, so that'll be really funny.
Oh, nice.
Excellent.
But we've been talking about reactions, and I know Scott, you're not necessarily one to get too philosophical in terms of reactionary needs. But I was actually looking to just kind of pivot us to the Dynasty Junkies trades because we have so many to talk about.
A lot.
But did you want to talk about reactions at all before we wrap that topic up?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I've actually been a little bit surprised. Some leagues seem to. I guess what I'm seeing is leagues are feeding off each other a little bit. So I have some leagues that are doing like nothing right now. There's no trades. And I think everybody's kind of in that like, okay, let's try not to react or overreact. And then I have some leagues that are just going bonkers, right? Like one trade leads to another leads to another. And then, we're going. So yeah, I mean, I guess you kind of gotta, you have to pick a lane depending on what your league's doing. And then, you have to make some moves. So, I mean, we'll get into some of the trades here tonight. And Tommy and I have made a couple moves too. So, I mean, we're jumping in where we can. And I mean, I think anytime you have injuries and you have some of the crazy things we've seen already in 2 weeks, I think you have to react. But, try not to overreact as much as we want to one way or another. Right. Yeah. Sometimes we get too high on our teams, and that's not always the best thing either. Then you're me trading away all your picks for like Derrick Henry, and it's week 2, so let's maybe not do that.
Nobody. Well, on that note, we will pivot to our listener league updates just because we have so many, and there have been more trades made even today that I didn't even get on the sheet.
Yeah,
and I'm like, that's great. We'll save them for next week because they're going to have something. And we've got what looks to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 trades. Some of these are bigger than others, right? Some of these are not as big of a deal. But I do think all of these in one way or in one form or fashion have a reactionary feel to them, which is exactly what you would expect in an active trade. So the first one is in DJ1. Dynasty Junkies won the OG League. It's a 12-teamer. This is the one where Rocky and I are teamed up. And then I think, Scott, you're by yourself at this point in that league, correct?
I'm solo,
a solo league. All right. So in this one, we got Dr. Toboggan gave up Bucky Irving and his own 3rd-round pick in 25 to Admiral Dakbar for Hunter Henry and our Dynasty Junkies 4th-round pick, as if that matters. So Bucky Irving in a 3rd or Hunter Henry in a 4th. Pat, I'll kick it to you first. Which of these two sides would you prefer? I know I have my answer.
Keep in mind, heavy tight end premium.
It is a tight end premium.
Yeah.
It is a tight end premium. Yep. Good point.
I still got to go with Bucky in the 3rd. Although if the Hunter Henry team is contending, I totally get the trade from their perspective. Could be mutually beneficial. Yeah,
I think this is one of those trades where you're like, I'll take the points. Bucky Irving isn't really landing it that well right now. But in my mind, I have Bucky over Henry, and then the pick swap is a round up anyway. I almost feel like the picks should have been the other way. I feel like Bucky Irving has a lot more future potential in my mind. I think he's probably the heir apparent in Tampa, and that Tampa offense looks great. So I'm with you. I'd rather have the Bucky Irving side. So Admiral Dakbar got the better end of the deal there. But what do you think, Scott? Do you agree?
Yeah, I think, Hunter Henry side definitely isn't the sexy side, but I think you put points in your lineup. That's one way to do it. I think the thing with Bucky is he's probably never going to be a guy that's going to carry the load. Maybe he's more of like the Gibbs in that offense, right? Like a Gibbs Monty type, thing there. So I can understand it from both sides. Although I think maybe in this case, the pick maybe does sway it for me. I probably take the Bucky side and just, roll with it. So
amen to that. Yeah. I mean, we do have Hunter Henry as the tight end 5 so far in the year, which is just like everyone predicted, right? That's exactly how things go. So I'm entirely with you. I think we all kind of agree that the Bucky side is the better one, but I don't blame you for getting Hunter Henry. Again, with as crazy and as chaotic as the tight end position has been, if you can go get someone that's actually putting up points, I'm not going to fault you for that. Like, that's not a bad deal. We're going to move on then to Dynasty Junkies 2, where I feel like we've had the most action by far. Andrew Imber is basically blowing up his team at this point. He's doing a full-on rebuild, and there's a lot of things, kind of to what Scott said too, like one trade leads to another. It's been a whole week of trades, and I think we had another one or two even in this one that came through today. So we'll kind of run through these. First one, Dynasty Dickies gave up Juwan Johnson, again, reactionary tight end, right? He's not terrible, but that maybe you're looking for some help. So he gives up Juwan Johnson and a 25 fourth to Patty Rice Cakes, which is Justin Mercer's team, for Malik Willis, the QB out of Green Bay, which is an odd thing to say, and a 25 third. So Juwan Johnson and a fourth, or Malik Willis and a third. Scott, I'll go to you first on this one. Again, Superflex 14 team, tight end premium. Which one do you prefer here?
Yeah, I think I'm going to go with the quarterback. I know Jordan Love, they said he's not going to be out long, but the interesting thing to me there is, and, I'm curious to hear Pat's thoughts on this, being the Packers. They brought in Willis and then just like kicked everybody else to the curb. They're like, okay, yeah, we're rolling with him. Like, okay, Love's out. Okay, Willis, you're in. And they created the game plan and they did what they needed to do and they got the win. So it's like, okay, you see that and you're like, all right, well, I think they could probably work with him a little bit. And he just got there basically, right? He's been there like 2 weeks. So it's kind of one of those things where 14 team quarterback, I'm going to swing that way. And again, the pick on that side as well, being the third. So again, I'm going to always sway quarterback there generally.
I am too. Yeah. And even with the Jordan Love news and possibly returning and all this, I mean, there's nothing to say that Love doesn't re-injure or have another slowdown or something. So yeah, Pat, what are your thoughts on this QB situation? And kind of to what Scott said too, like, is Malik Willis, like, was he just overwhelmingly the guy and like they just were done with everyone else? Or is it more of just like, yeah, good enough and we'll move on? I mean, what are your thoughts there? And then on the trade as well?
So they did manage to re-sign Sean Clifford to their practice squad.
Okay.
So they have him there, although I don't think Sean Clifford is any good and really didn't think he was any good at Penn State.
Yeah, you're not alone.
So and it's funny, like Willis was able to execute, albeit a very conservative game plan, but like the offense hummed with him there in this run-centric approach. And he does have that rushing upside, and we know that's the cheat code to quarterbacks. Now, he hasn't really shown much aptitude as a passer. It's been kind of a sack magnet whenever he's played. He's got more interceptions than touchdowns, but I don't know. Maybe this is the place where they can develop him. He seems like a really nice guy. And I guess I am just like throwing up my hands at Juwan Johnson because like every time I expect him to maybe like take a step up, and it seemed like there was an opportunity this year, but then like I think he was dealing with a foot injury in training camp, and now it looks like maybe it's not Juwan Johnson at all. Like it's Foster Moreau who's getting more snaps and targets. So yeah, I mean, I'd much rather have Willis here. Like, I don't know. Maybe Juwan Johnson does at some point this season provide value and tight end premium, but I don't know. I'm just not optimistic.
Man, the Saints have just been very interesting this year. I don't think anybody expected the Saints to do anything of value, and they're just dominating for some reason. Malik Willis was QB 17 in week 2, which doesn't sound great, but when you think about it, in a Superflex 14-team league, you're starting 28 quarterbacks most likely. QB 17 is nothing to sniff your nose at. Like, that is actually a pretty solid ending. And I just laugh when these things happen. He finished ahead of Pat Mahomes, Dak Prescott, and Justin Herbert. So of course he did. Like that, just like we predicted, right? Like that's what I'm saying. Like this whole thing is about what the hell do we know? He did only throw for 122 yards, which I think is something to be said about the production in general being down. But again, if you're going to throw for that few yards and no interceptions, 1 touchdown, and that gets you QB 17 over some of those studs, that just tells you where we're at, right? I would almost never say to someone, yeah, definitely start Malik Willis over Pat Mahomes. That's crazy talk. But when the outcome happens like that, I'd rather have Malik Willis on my bench than Juwan Johnson. So I'm with you guys. I think it's the QB for me, especially in a Superflex 14 teamer. It screams that's the side that I want. And like you said, Scott, it's got the better pick on it too. So it's a win-win. Well,
and I think he's probably just going, Jordan Love's the guy. So like, why do I care about a backup? But like, it's almost like, especially in a 14 team, the backup quarterbacks are like backup running backs. Like, when you're going to start them generally. So I'll just keep them on my bench. Like I want a handful of those guys.
Yeah.
And we've seen it's a viable strategy to have backups as like your third QB, right? Because you're not really going to have 3 legit guys in a 14 team. You know, maybe a couple of teams do, but everybody isn't going to. So it's a viable strategy. And I mean, Willis fits well within that.
Well, and to kind of on that note, there's another trade we'll kind of skip ahead to using Dynasty Dickies as well. Andy Dalton is somebody I've had on my bench for a while. I've always been a fan of the Red Rifle. I know he was here when he was in Cincinnati. I liked him. I liked his play. Just couldn't get over that playoff curse. But Andy Dalton is somebody that I've rostered in a lot of leagues because I was always thinking, you know, Bryce Young, he's a little shorter. He hasn't really had a lot of leash. There's a chance that not that they bench him, but that he gets hurt and they keep him out to kind of protect their asset. Like the Panthers aren't going anywhere. Dalton seems like prime position. And again, in Dynasty Junkies too, Dickies gave up 2 third-round picks for Andy Dalton from the Fantasy Timeline guys. And I think, again, it's that same kind of thing. I'd much rather have Dalton than the 2/3. But I get the logic of saying, well, now's my time to strike and get out, right? Like now's the time to get out on Dalton. He's actually showing value. That's when you move him, right? That's why you have him on your roster. So I don't think either of these are bad sides. I would probably rather keep Dalton for thirds. Thirds are kind of fluky. I know I've got Dalton in a couple leagues where people are sending me like just straight up 1 seconds. And I'm like, I think I'm willing to wait. I don't think Dalton is a sell now. I mean, he could be at the right price, but I'm willing to wait a week and see what he puts up on this offense. I think with the way that they've got the receivers there, they've got Miles Sanders, like they've got some people and Chuba Hubbard, like they've got some guys that can catch the ball. I just want to see what Dalton can do. So to kind of wrap back up to the trade here, Pat, I'll kick it to you first on this one. The Andy Dalton side, or again, 14 teamer, Andy Dalton or 2/3, which would you prefer?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to have more context on this deal. Like, his fantasy timeline pretty set at quarterback and isn't ever going to need Andy Dalton. So I can understand just wanting to get a little bit of draft capital, and 2/3. It's not nothing because I know, yes, you're right, Andrew, that the hit rate on thirds is not great, but if you have 2 of them, that's extra darts to fire and an extra chance.
Well, thirds gets deals done, right? So like that sometimes can help you close deals. I agree with you entirely on that logic.
That too. So yeah, I don't mind this deal for either side. I think it's pretty reasonably fair.
Well, the timeline guys here are in a full-on rebuild pretty much. Their best quarterback is Michael Penix. So that's sense. Jacoby Brissett, who's playing tonight. They got Jake Browning, but like they're a kind of team like Scott was talking about, like with a lot of second and third QBs on their team. Their best running back is Roshan Johnson, right? So like they're not contending. So to me, that trade makes perfect sense for the timeline guys, right? Like that's exactly the kind of like just get rid of him, move off. I don't need the points. Dickies, on the other hand, had Jordan Love and Bryce Young. And so, you know, those 2 guys you're looking at like, well, now I may not have a quarterback at all. And he's got Kyron Williams, Kenneth Walker, CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson, Devonta Smith. Like he's got a contending roster. So he's fine giving up the thirds. He's like, just give me that Andy Dalton. That way he's got Bryce Young if he ever comes back. Like you've got yourself a starter and he can keep going and getting points. So again, the context is key. We try to take a little bit of that out of this because it's hard to manipulate that in the grand scheme of things, but you're exactly right. The context matters a lot here and both sides won in that regard. But Scott, I think I know which side you're going to pick, but I don't know if I heard your analysis here.
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes sense. I actually wanted to use this trade to ask you guys about Bryce Young because my initial thought was like, you know, just the way the media does everything, you know, like Bryce Young benched. It's historic. A number 1 pick has never been, and they're like talking like the guy's never going to play again, you know, and it's like the guy's just been beat up for a year and a half, and you got a new coach who's in there going, okay, my guy's getting crushed. He's losing his confidence. Like let's sit him down. Let's, you know, give him like, to me, it wasn't like, oh, this guy's never playing again in Carolina. Like that was not a thought even at all in my mind. I thought it was just kind of like a little bit of a reset. Like, let's get the veteran in here. Let's steady some things. Let's let Bryce watch a little bit. I believe Bryce Young will start games again in Carolina, like this 100%. Year. So
week 8.
I thought it was a massive overreaction by like the entire world. Like it was just mind boggling because I don't know. Maybe he is done in Carolina. But I would guess he gets shot somewhere else. I mean, he's a talented kid, but if you know anything about his story is like, you know, I think his dad's like a psychologist. Like he's a real super mentally strong kid. I mean, he's just physically been beaten to hell. Like anybody can't survive. No one on earth can survive that. He's not superhuman. And so I think like a reset's a good thing. So I'm trying to buy Bryce Young.
Exactly what I was going to say.
So
I think buy Bryce Young is the move here for sure.
Yeah, I've sent out so many offers for Bryce Young. I've been trying to. We talked a couple of weeks ago about getting rid of Deshaun Watson shares, and so I'm like, all right, Bryce, let's go after Bryce Young now. Anything I can do. So, he's my next target there. But yeah, I mean, I get where this guy's at, especially because he has Bryce. So getting Dalton there. With the context, like Pat said, you bring in that context, it definitely makes sense for both sides. So I think this made sense. I'd probably take the thirds, honestly, even though I'm all about Willis and the other one. It's just this one's more about Dalton's like, what, 36?
34 or something like that. He's up there. That's for sure. Yeah.
He's not really starting beyond this year. So, at best he's a bridge or something, which I don't even
36. You're right. 36.
Yeah. So I'll probably just take the thirds, honestly. But with the context added, definitely makes sense for both teams.
Yeah, no, I think it makes sense. Exactly right. And I think those are the two Dickies trades in DJ2. Now we're going to do two trades from Andrew Ember's team, who I mentioned before is kind of blowing it up. I think I have opinions about this, and we'll get into these, of course. One of the trades, there was a trade made that then two pieces were swapped back, which I think is hilarious. So I took that out of it to keep it simpler. Because otherwise it would just get confusing. But in this one, we have find me a team name, gave up a 26 first, second, and third in exchange for Andrew Ember giving up Aaron Rodgers and Isaiah Likely. So I'm looking at this again, 14-team tight end premium. You're giving away a quarterback and a tight end and a super flex 14-teamer, and you're getting back a 26 1-2-3. Scott, I'll go to you first on this one. What are your thoughts on this first Andrew Ember trade of the night?
So I thought at first it was a lot. I thought it was like a good return, meaning like, oh, that made sense. Like let's get the return on that. But I looked at the teams a little deeper and I thought, okay, actually this probably makes sense. I'd be willing to take the swing just because the fact it's 26 versus the 25 picks. So yeah, I mean, it's 2 years out, so I guess that's your last chance to get out on Rodgers, and you're essentially getting a first for Likely, and then I guess a second for Rodgers, and like a free third, basically,
or even vice versa. Yeah, depending on how you want to value it. But yeah, I'm with you.
So I was gonna say, so I've actually traded Likely for a first plus in similar scoring leagues a couple times in the last couple weeks. So I think that's where the cash out point is on him, like a first and a third. That totally makes sense. Based on what he can do, based on that offense. Andrews, if he gets hurt, we know Likely's a stud. So I like the trade. I think I would take the players here just because I can probably replace those picks.
No, that's fair. Pat, what are your thoughts there? Do you want the players or the 26 gamut of picks there?
Oh, I mean, this is it's such a funny deal. It's like a, some big box furniture store where you can buy the bed and the dresser set. No payments till 2026.
I've got so much time.
You get a quarterback and a tight end and don't have to pay. Yeah, two nice pieces for what I would assume is probably a team in contention and not having to give up anything until 2026. Now, granted, that's going to be a steep price to pay in 2026. And, he could conceivably spend 2025 trying to find ways to recoup draft capital for the following year. But, it seems like it's a really interesting deal. And I was looking at this one before the show and just kind of noodling it over. And I don't know that I can declare a winner on this one. I think it's a fair exchange, but it's creatively done. I applaud both sides for getting this one done.
And Steven had just lost Tua, so he's got Josh Allen, and he needed that second quarterback to pair in there until he can figure out what to do next. So like you said, it was a creative way he got a second quarterback, which was ultimately the goal, but he also got another piece that could increase in value too, because we know Rodgers isn't going to, but Likely certainly could. depending on what happens going forward. So,
well, and
yeah,
to your point too,
makes
he's
sense.
also got Kincaid as his other tight end, who has been kind of disappointing, right? So like it gives you some win now points on a team that was it is a little light at running back, but otherwise win now. I mean, I'm kind of agreeing with you on there, and I would take the players too. I think that's kind of where I would take the players too as a contender. Is kind of where my head goes.
Yeah,
I think that's actually really good value, and if you're just taking it in a vacuum, I think the picks make more sense. But 2 years out, I don't know. I feel like that's about right for Rodgers and about right for Likely. I think that's probably what that the exit point for me would be if I'm not a contender or not sure. But if I'm contending, I'll give that up for those kinds of players because those are the anti players. Those are the players we didn't expect to be scoring points. And I just lost Tua, and Kincaid is underperforming. Hey, that bolsters up my team. It gives me a chance to kind of go in this year. So I totally get the logic. The other trade that Andrew did in this league was with Trey Lance Refrigeration. I'll be honest, one of my favorite team names in all of fantasy, Trey Lance Refrigeration, like just a great Office reference. So Trey Lance Refrigeration gave up DJ Moore to the now blowing up Andrew Ember's team, who gave up Devontae Adams and Keenan Allen. So it's basically, two aging receivers for a, likely number one and slightly younger receiver in DJ Moore. Pat, which of these two options would you prefer? It's all receivers, right? Which is kind of nice, but Devontae Adams and Keenan Allen or DJ Moore, which do you like?
DJ Moore.
Yeah.
I think he got the best. Andrew got the best player in the deal.
Mm-hmm.
And well, I don't know, maybe this year Devontae is going to outpoint DJ Moore. It's possible, but if he does, I don't know if that's necessarily DJ Moore's fault. Like, hard to believe that Gardner Minshew might be the better quarterback than Caleb Williams this year, but I guess it's possible that it could work out that way. Moore has just been so good, and he has done it in some very suboptimal offensive ecosystems throughout his career. And oddly enough, the only quarterback who murdered DJ Moore's stats was Baker Mayfield in Carolina. That is the weird thing. He produced with like Kyle Allen and Sam Darnold when Darnold was just totally lost. And then like Baker Mayfield just like couldn't get DJ Moore going. Which really
well,
weird.
this is like the best quarterback he's ever played with in Caleb Williams. And it hasn't worked yet, but it's only been 2 weeks, but it's just, ooh.
Yeah. But so I guess I'd like this more if I still had a good feeling about Keenan Allen, but I'm not getting a good feeling about how Keenan Allen's season has started and starting to wonder if it's the beginning of the end for him.
Yeah. And I know we have him on one of our Kings Classic teams, and it was kind of a question we were talking about over the weekend. Like, we don't know if Keenan Allen's going to play on Monday. Like, maybe we start a guy on Sunday. And luckily we got that news that, Keenan Allen was doubtful. And I was like, well, then we're putting in Madison. And I think that was the right choice. But again, I think there's a lot of fantasy managers out there like that with Keenan Allen. Like, is this the end of the road? Is this kind of where, Roma Dunze takes over as the 2 and Keenan Allen becomes the Tyler Lockett in that offense, which isn't necessarily a knock. Both of them are stud receivers. They're just a little past their prime and are harder to get points when they get in that older age. So I'm with you. I'd rather have the DJ Moore side here. I think, again, he got the best player in the deal. You're most likely getting the wide receiver 1 on the Bears for the next 2, maybe 3 years, depending on how this goes. I don't know if Rome overtakes DJ Moore. If he does, that's a great thing. I'm not upset with that at all, but I still think DJ Moore is the asset to have. Scott, what are your thoughts on this trade?
Well, so first of all, as I'm like cruising through my emails, I thought this was my trade in another league. So I got super excited, but it wasn't. So what's going on right now is everybody's confused and frustrated about the Bears offense and who's the guy and what do I do? And DJ Moore,
Chicago. Yeah.
Like, I have talked about DJ Moore for years. Going back to my rants on Trade Addicts about like why everybody's obsessed with DJ Moore and the guy just doesn't do it. Like, yes, he's a good player. I get it. He's a great player. And I love that he's a Chicago Bear. Don't get me wrong, but like, he's just not special. I don't care. Like, you could play with all the quarterbacks you want. Do you remember the quarterbacks DeAndre Hopkins played with in Houston? I mean, definitely worse.
Davis Mills, right?
Whatever. No. Before that.
I'm trying to think back.
I mean,
players I don't even know.
Guys, we don't even remember their names. I mean, that's generally the talent's going to win out. I mean, Garrett Wilson the last couple of years with the Jets. But ultimately this is points in your lineup for, the future. That's the trade here. You're going to get points now with Adams and hopefully Allen. Allen's just a little banged up right now, but he actually should be the guy. I think that's actually what's affecting this offense so much.
Yeah.
Is that he has not been there, and Caleb has not had that quick read throw that is supposed to be there. That's how the offense is supposed to run inside out. And Odunze is really going to be the X ultimately, but he's still a rookie, he's still gearing up. So I mean, and he's banged up too. So it's a little bit of a mess right now. The O-line's still adjusting to the scheme. Like there's a lot going on. So ultimately for Drew, one of 4 in this league,
right.
for Drew Reinecker, this is points in the lineup with Adams, and then hopefully another piece with Keenan Allen at some point during the season. And then for Andrew, just going with the theme of what he's doing, moving off those 2 veterans, that's probably the best he could hope for, was a DJ Moore from those 2 pieces. So again, another trade that guys that know what they're doing, making trades, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say this before we move off of this: the Trey Lance Refrigeration. I didn't think of that, but one of the timeline guys is Drew too. That's
and then Drew, and then Drew time.
But no, he still has Trey Lance on his roster, and I fully respect that. I think if you're going to have a name like that, you have to have Trey Lance on your roster, and just hold. It's too funny otherwise. All right, so we'll get to our last trade of the night, and this is the one I was looking forward to talking about with you, Scott, because it's our 2 teams in Dynasty Junkies 3. So Rocky and I talked about it. I'm sure you and Tommy talked about it. We can kind of go through it, but I'll just kick it to Pat first and kind of let him go in blind, and then we'll give the context. So Pat, this trade, as you can see on the sheet, was Kirk Cousins and Jordan Mason, or Drake May and a 26 second. Which of those 2 sides would you prefer? Now, again, it's a 14-team super flex tight end premium. Kirk Cousins and Jordan Mason, or Drake May and a second. Which do you like more?
Now, I get that, clearly more immediate value for the Dynasty Junkies in this deal, but I am such a Drake May fan. So yeah, I mean, I would want May here for sure. I mean, Cousins, I don't know what the timeline is for Cousins on
Neither
his
do we.
career.
Yeah.
It could be the Michael Penix show. Like after week 1, I was wondering if it might be the Michael Penix show by October.
Yeah.
And
Still
but
be.
the other interesting variable here is like Jordan Mason has looked really good.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's not like his value disappears entirely when Christian McCaffrey comes back. Like, yes, he could be stuck behind McCaffrey in San Francisco for a while, but he looks like he has a pretty bright future in the NFL. So that is something to consider. But yeah, I want May, like the running quarterback with the strong arm, and just like I think he's eventually like got a pretty good chance to be a top 10 NFL quarterback.
I'm right there with you. And I'll be honest, we are the Dynasty Junkies, as you mentioned, we gave up May in the second and got friend of the show, Kirk Cousins, at this point, because he's an aging quarterback and that's who Rocky loves, and the potentially 4-week rental of Jordan Mason. Scott, I want to hear your thoughts, and then I'll give you ours, which ours aren't as much, I'm guessing, but maybe you have other thoughts you wanted to throw in there.
Well, so the funny thing is, I thought we had already traded Jordan Mason, so I was like, wait, what? Did we get him back? Like, because we had been in so many trade discussions with Jordan Mason for the last 2 weeks. Obviously Tommy and I did the show last week, so we were talking about it then, and then we were texting back and forth, and like we were offering counters and doing all this stuff. And I thought for sure, like somebody, like who's not going to give up a second for Mason once DMC went on IR? I just couldn't believe it. These guys were, countering back with all sorts, and we're like, no, let's hold out. And then he said, I offered a trade, but I'll pull it if you don't like it. But it's, it's going after Drake May. And I was like, oh yeah, I mean, for what we're trying to do, this totally makes sense. And then once I realized it was Kirk Cousins and it was Rocky, I was like, we actually might get this done. So let's juice it up a little bit here and go with the double. Cause I think the Mason piece is big, Drake May, who knows? Certainly potential is a great thing. We'll all, talk about it until it's not there. But Cousins will put points in the lineup right now. And then, that Mason piece is something that's going to be huge for you guys. That's probably what did this trade ultimately. Without that, it just wouldn't have happened.
So yeah, here's the other funny thing is here's the way this trade came to be was pretty much two separate trades that we just combined into one, right? I know you sent over one that was like Drake May for Kirk Cousins, and then there was another one from you guys that was the second for Jordan Mason,
which we had spammed to everybody after.
Correct, and I figured as much, and that made total sense to do that. And I remember I texted Rocky or something at some point, and I was just like, I'd rather have May than Cousins, and he's like, I don't know, I'd rather have Cousins than May, and I'm like, of course you would, like of course Rocky wants Cousins, like that's just like one of his boo-boos, and he just loves Rocky, he just loves the old quarterback. So I was like, well, I'm not a huge fan of that trade because Cousins might have a short leash, and I do think May is the future in New England. I'm like, I don't know if we're truly contending because, like we were talking about earlier, it's kind of hard to know right now. And I'm like, I don't really want to give up our future for someone that could be a rental. And then we got that second offer of Mason for the second, and I was like, well, that sounds fair, but I don't know. I feel like a second again. Like I feel like a second's a little bit of a high price. Like I don't know. And so I sent it back to Rocky, and I was like, oh, those are both from Scott and Tommy. Would you just do both? Because he wasn't really sold on the other one. He liked Cousins, but he preferred the second. And he's like, we don't know if Mason's going to be there for a while. I'm like, yeah, I know, but the second is kind of a fly in the pan. It's 26.
Actually 26. Yeah.
Well, it's like, I think you offered a 25. And so we countered with the 26. Yep. And I'm like, all right, so now we're lowering that trade, but then we're getting some value. And I was like, you know what, Rocky, it's for fun. Like, this is a fun league. It's with our co-hosts. Let's do it for the content. Like, let's just make this a trade. And we can laugh about it for the rest of our lives if this Drake May trade ends up being what kills us. But I didn't put it on the show sheet, but we ended up making another trade just today where we sent Jordan Mason.
Oh yes,
for Devontae Adams. And again, not the same league that we were just talking about. So this is a different team, and just a straight up Jordan Mason for Devontae Adams. We can maybe talk about it even next week. But our thought there was then we're trading a 26 second for Devontae Adams pretty much. And that felt like good value. I do think that Adams still has a wide receiver one future, at least in Las Vegas. I'm not sure if he's a fantasy wide receiver one, but I think Cousins has a longer leash than maybe people give him credit for. This win this week really helped. Let's be honest. That was, there was some doubt, I think, in a lot of people's minds. I don't think we see much of Drake May this year. If Brissett keeps it up, he seems to be playing all right. So, yeah, it was one of those, like, I don't necessarily love it. Like the calculators hated it for our side. They much preferred Drake May, as they should. They may much preferred the second because, again, a lot of them are very reactionary, and the trades for Jordan Mason hadn't come through yet. So like it's just all of that stuff was kind of in my head, and I'm like, screw it. Like it's supposed to be for fun. Let's go have fun. So that was some of the context and kind of where we were on that. I think we did a pretty good job. There are some others that we'll get to next week, but yeah. Heavy, busy week in the Dynasty Junkies leagues this week. Good job, everybody. Thank you so much for that. That was a very long segment for a change, and I'm a fan of it. We're going to get into our favorite segment of the night. It is our last segment of the night, and I'd be remiss if I didn't play our friend Brian Haar.
Find me a trade.
That's right. Find me a trade, everybody. We're going to find me a trade. So this one is submitted by Andy Hoffner. The league name is Foot Clan Assemble. I'm guessing he's a Fantasy Footballers fan or a Ninja Turtles fan. Hard to say. But the Foot Clan is something I'm very familiar with in both regards. It is a 12-team Superflex, single PPR for receivers, and then a +1 extra PPR, full PPR for tight ends. So 2-point PPR for tight ends. Start 11. You got a QB, 2 running back, 3 receiver, tight end, 3 flex, and a super flex. Pretty much what I would call your basic lineup with 3 receivers in there. I feel like that's pretty common these days. I'll get the rosters pulled up, but if you want to read, Scott, the comments from
I have the roster if you want me to do that.
Oh, perfect. Then I'll pull up the comments if you want to do the roster. That works.
So
go ahead.
All right. Quarterback, he has Penix, Jaden Daniels, Jameis Winston, Dak Prescott, Daniel Jones. Running back, Dylan Lobby, Madison, Justice Hill, Miles Sanders, Gainwell, Ramondre Stevenson, Tyjae Spears, and Chuba Hubbard. Wide receiver, CeeDee Lamb, Josh Downs, Brandon Cooks, Troy Franklin, Cowing, Osborne. Not a lot going on there.
Question mark.
And then tight end, Jake Ferguson and Chiga Conquo. So he's got like the Cowboys starting lineup there, and then that's about it. But the good news is 325 first and 325 seconds, and an additional 26 second on top of all of his picks as well.
Yeah.
So a fully loaded arsenal of picks there, ready to utilize however best needed, and hopefully we can help you do that.
Yeah. So Andy, again, we're just a very Drew-centered show tonight. Who knew? But Andy sent this in, and his comments where he took over this team in a dispersal. These were notes from back in August, but took over this team in a dispersal. I don't think I have the necessary pieces to compete, so would like to do a soft reset. 2025 picks are still out there, so I'd like to take advantage of being the first to pounce on collecting them if possible. I'm going to guess he already went and collected a couple of those,
yes,
which makes total sense.
Good job.
And again, I agree. I think that's the way to go. I think it's interesting. We all kind of came up with very different trades, but I guess they all involve Cowboys because, like you said, the Cowboys are really the only assets of value on his roster. It's like, yeah, if you're going to trade something, it's probably going to be one of the Cowboys players. But I guess, Pat, why don't we get to yours first? Which one did you find, and what would you do if this was your roster?
All right, so I took the manager's comments to heart here and was trying to get him another 2025 first and maybe some other goodies. So looking at some of the other rosters, I noticed that Saturated Pig has this very lopsided roster. Saturated Pig is loaded at running back, and I mean loaded at running back, but has some deficiencies at quarterback and wide receiver. So it's got to be frustrating for this manager to have this firepower at running back and not be able to put the pieces together around that position. So I was thinking that the offer to Saturated Pig here by Andy could be Dak Prescott and Brandon Cooks. Give him the Dallas pitch and catch combo and get in return Saturated Pig's 2025 first rounder and Jonathan Brooks, who he doesn't need on that loaded crew. And I know that, really Andy needs wide receiver help, but in terms of just what I think is a fairly balanced deal in terms of value, and I actually did run this through a couple of calculators, and they were within, a couple points of being even.
Okay. That's all you need. Yeah, that's all you need. Yeah. I think this is a great trade too, because Saturated Pig, again, I love this segment if for no other reason than reading some of the most insane combinations of words in my life, and they're all recorded for posterity. So Saturated Pig, which is, again, terrific sleeper name, doesn't really have much at quarterback, right? He's got Geno Smith, and that's about it. I guess Aiden O'Connell has some value maybe. But with all the running backs he's got, you would feel like this is a contending team. He's got Bijan Robinson, Devonna Chan, Chase Brown, Tony Pollard, Josh Jacobs, Jonathan Brooks. This team is Zach Charbonnet. This team is locked and loaded to contend in running back and nowhere else. And it's odd to me. And with a team like that, he needs help at the other positions. I mean, he's got Sam Laporta, I guess, at tight end, and Hunter Henry, who we talked about. But he really could use a receiver and a quarterback. And I think this is the prime kind of place. If this team is 2-0, I could see them taking this trade and being like, this makes my team significantly better. And all I have to give up is an injured running back I'm not using and a 25 first, which might be later if I win it all. So I think this is a terrific trade. Scott, what do you think?
Yeah, absolutely love it. I mean, moving off Dak was my first instinct with this team. And I maybe thought that was a little bit crazy. So I kind of reeled back in from that, but I'm glad to see Pat's on the same page, because that's definitely how you not only shed points this season, but then you can go get yourself not only the first, but that extra piece there too in Brooks.
Yeah.
I just also made a trade for Brooks in a league I'm in where I moved Barkley and some other, similar Cooks types for Brooks and some pieces. So I like doing that when you're looking towards the future, especially with Carolina's chaos right now. Even if you like the talent of Brooks, you're going who's doing anything in Carolina, right? Let's just get rid of this guy before we have to deal with it. So yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense timing wise and just overall. I love it.
Yeah. I think it's one of those teams where if I had Andy's team, I would feel like, man, do I really want to give up Dak? I've got Jaden Daniels, like you mentioned, got Daniel Jones. Do I really want to give up Dak? And then I'm looking at what I'm getting back, and I'm like, hell yeah. I'll gladly take that extra 25 first and Brooks. I've gone window shopping on Brooks, and by that I mean sending messages like, hey, are you interested in moving Brooks? And some of that in some of the teams where I need running back help, and I'm not getting a lot of reaction to that. So there's a lot of people holding. But on a team like this with all those running backs, I could see that being an easy piece to move. So, Scott, since your trade also, or one of your options involved Dak, why don't you go next?
Yeah, so basically with that treasure trove of future picks there, I figured, move points out of your lineup and, race to the bottom, and let's at least get your pick high enough. And then, wherever the other picks fall, that's fine. Looking ahead a little bit to the 25 class, got an interesting discussion in one of the Patreons the other night with some people were like, oh, the quarterback class next year is just loaded. And then somebody else was like, that's not, it's absolutely not loaded. It's the opposite of loaded. And like, that's more the page I was on too, personally. Yeah. But so I think it's interesting that's really, there's definitely a couple guys that could work their way up, but I'm seeing a lot of receivers just in my Devy leagues, my C2C leagues, the highest rated guys right now there's a whole bunch of running backs. There's actually quite a few tight ends that maybe in the second round too would be great. Think about Laporta a couple of years ago, right? We're finding these guys in the second round. And then, heavy on wide receivers at the top. So if you can control your pick, which you can, that's what you can control. Let's move that thing up. We can fix your wide receivers there, or at least, put yourself in position to. If you don't want to take the risk, you could trade for studs, whatever you want to do, but just give yourself the options. So my move was to move Dak to team Trav Bob for JJ McCarthy and another 25 first. And I think it takes some cojones to do it, because you look at the rest of your quarterback room and you're like, oh, Dak's pretty safe and he's right there and I can just plug him in for the next few years. And now I'm trading for a guy. I don't know. He's going to miss the whole year. I don't know what's going to happen, but that offense is making Darnold look good. Like, come on, man. I'm so excited for JJ. Like, let's go, man. Can we get to
clarify? You're talking about JJ McCarthy and not Justin
McCarthy.
Jefferson.
Yep.
Just to be clear.
Yeah. Okay. JJ McCarthy. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Yep. I think I said JJ.
I know, but I was confused at first too. So I just want to make sure someone didn't hear it, just in case. Sorry.
Yeah. Dak for JJ and a 25 first. And it may be a lot. That might be too much. You might have to add something in there, which is totally fine. You've got plenty of ancillary pieces to add in with that. So, and then just a general, I would move on from your running backs, any of those guys that we can move off of. Ramondre is a guy that I would maybe spam out for a 25 first. He just signed an extension. I know they're playing tonight, so I don't know. I haven't been able to see any of the games, so maybe this isn't going to work well, but maybe you have to wait a couple weeks for that one. But there is Saucy P33 has Pacheco. And that's a team that's kind of more tender mode. And so that's a guy I would target with Ramondre. Maybe you can add in a piece there and then get back, even take a shot on a guy like Cedric Tillman. The reason he comes to mind is because Cleveland is that receiver. I mean, the receivers are, I don't know. And Cooper's going to be gone and whatever. So it's like, why not take a shot on a guy that maybe he'll be a starter next year, or maybe you could just cut him and get your roster spot back. But if you're just trying to find pieces like that, you got to take some shots at receiver to kind of reload that receiver room. So that's where I added that in.
Makes sense to me. So Pat, what do you think about that one? Dak for McCarthy and a first.
Love that idea, because the what is the name of that team? The team that would be getting Trav Bob. Yeah, because they're giving up nothing for this year. And getting a top 10 quarterback for basically nothing.
Now, I mean, they have other quarterbacks. They have Justin Herbert, Trevor Lawrence, Zach Wilson. Like, they've got names, but I don't feel confident really in any of those guys right
Herbert's now. Banged up. T-Law's not been up to stuff. I just saw a T-Law trade that blew my mind, actually, like a couple hours ago in one of my leagues. And it just, like, his value's just not.
Man, if you had the Herbert Trevor Lawrence combination a couple of years ago, you thought you were set for the next decade, and all of a sudden it's like, whoa, all right, now Herbert's running the Greg Roman offense, and Trevor Lawrence never developed as planned. So that was actually me in a league a couple of years ago, and I traded away Trevor Lawrence, and not too thrilled with Herbert anymore. I like that deal a lot. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, no, and I agree. I think I'd be fine even sending one of those 25 seconds back if I have to get that deal
Yes,
done.
of course.
And that's something too where maybe you've got another player, maybe you're really high on Kamani Vidal still, or you're really high on Jonathan Mingo or something. Maybe you can get him to add that and add your second or something. Like I think the bones of that are really solid. And I think too, if I'm Andy's team looking at this, I don't want Dak on my team, right? You got too many Cowboys. Like I don't mind stacking, but you've got Jake Ferguson, CeeDee Lamb, and Brandon Cooks. It's like maybe we should spread that out a little bit, right? And then just go for a fourth first next year. That's always a nice feeling. So yeah, I think that was a good trade. I'll get into mine last year and we'll see what you guys think of it. I think again, it involves a Cowboy, the aforementioned CeeDee Lamb. I would trade with Nick Adams. I would send CeeDee Lamb for the injured Puka Nacua and the rookie Rome Odunze. And my idea here is you could pivot this into an immediate contender in a sense. I think there is a chance that Puka comes back. I think a good chance that Puka comes back this year. It gives you some depth at running back, at receiver. It splits one into two ascending. I still think ascending assets, even though Nakua is hurt, he's technically declining and descending. But I still think you're going to see him rebound when he does start to play again. I think the Rams offense is going to do better with him in the lineup too. And again, Rome, I think we all talked about him before. Like he's probably going to be the wide receiver 2 on that team, but he has a chance to become the one and overtake DJ Moore at some point in the next couple of years. And if that offense does start to finally click, which we're all hoping that they will, Rome might be the best one of the bunch to see their value change, right? We're seeing DJ Moore. I don't know how much higher he can go. Allen just has to stay healthy, but Rome Odunze is one of those guys that I could see rising 30 ranks in the receivers, over the course of the season if he starts to show. So I just thought, let's get a little bit out of the Cowboys game. You still got Cooks and Ferguson, but sending a guy like Lamb for a player like Puka Nacua and Rome Odunze, I feel like that's, in theory, Nacua was going for what, 4 firsts last year or something crazy. Like even if you're saying CeeDee Lamb's worth 3 firsts, you got 1 for Odunze. He was just a first, and Puka Nacua is still 2 firsts, I think. So that trade feels fair value wise. And again, maybe you can add another little piece on top of that, or add another piece on your side to close the deal, whatever you feel like is right. But Scott, what do you think about that offer as we're sending Cowboys all over the place here?
Yeah, as our friend Shane Manila would say, this is splitting an asset. And,
yes.
And doing it the way that I always have a hard time doing that personally, but the way that you structured it here, where you get 2 guys that, like you said, could still be ascending.
Huge upside guys. Yeah.
Most likely will actually. So the odds are that they will versus they won't. Right. And so I like that a lot because that's going to address your biggest position of need. And then it gives you more flexibility. It's hard to actually pull off that trade because it's like CeeDee Lamb, it's like, and you have the stack with Dak. So it's like, it's tough to actually do it, but it does make a lot of sense.
Well, there's a world this team is 2-0, right? I mean, he submitted this back in August. We don't have an update. I stopped trying to get those because it just got to be too much for me. And this week got away from me with COVID and all. Sure. But it's just one of those things where I think this team could be a contender if you have enough depth at receiver. When you have to start 3 and you've got 3 flexes, you're starting 11, like you're going to need more players in your lineup. And so I don't mind having studs and duds if you only have to start 9. But I feel real weird when I have to click 11 check boxes in MFL and only 6 of them feel good, right? Like I want to have more depth there. So, and again, I think this is the kind of team that I could see that working out for. But Pat, I don't want to skip you on this one. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, it's an interesting deal for sure. I love the idea behind it. Puka is one of the hardest evaluations for me in Dynasty. Like that's the thing. I wonder if I would almost feel better about it if I were Andy, if I had if I were getting like
Garrett Wilson or Justin Jefferson, like those are the other guys on his roster. He's got a lot of receivers. Or even like maybe Jackson Smith and Jigba. Would you feel better if it was JSN in Rome? Like, would that make more sense, or is that not enough?
Or even a first? Yeah, I mean, maybe. No, I think I do value Puka ahead of JSN still for now. It's just that he's hard to get a read on because like he did all this with Cooper Kupp either hurt or I think kind of greatly diminished last year. What is he if he has to share the field with another good receiver? Can he be healthy? Like after sort of, he's hurt already and he has kind of this checkered college injury history. Mm-hmm. So he's just been a hard guy for me to peg, which is why I kind of have a hard time getting a handle on this deal. But I love Rome. Like I think Rome's future is going to be bright. I have no doubt that he is, like, at worst, a rock solid wide receiver 2 when he hits his stride. I like it. I do think there's an element of risk involved with Puka, but man, if like we get the Puka that we saw from last year, and like that is his career arc, like what a smash hit this would be.
Yeah, and I think the other one that I was looking at was maybe like CeeDee Lamb for Justin Jefferson in a piece. But I want 2 starters, and I don't know if you're going to get 2 starters if you make Justin Jefferson one of them. I mean, yeah, he's a little bit depreciated right now. That offense is a little wonky, and he's a little banged up. So maybe you could get a discount in a sense. But I mean, you're going to get what, Justin Jefferson and Greg Dortch? Well, I don't know. Does that seem worth it then? Like, I might as well just hold on to CeeDee Lamb. You know what I mean? Like, I just don't know anybody that's going to give you like Rome and Justin Jefferson for CeeDee Lamb. That just feels weird to me. I think too that there's a world where you could get like Jackson Smith and Jigba, Jermaine Burton, and Rome Odunze, or something. Like maybe you can go for 3 smaller assets or something there too. So again, I just think it's the kind of bones I like. The other angle too, you could go for like a 25 first and Jermaine Burton and Rome Odunze. Like there's a lot of options, I think, with splitting up Lamb. I do think though, if you're gonna get rid of a guy like Lamb, even on a rebuilding team, you need to get definitely ascending assets, and I think you need to be very okay with it if they don't, but also like just feel very like confident in that decision. You can't trade him for risk, like not all risk, right? Yeah, we want risk. We want ascending assets. We're guessing that risk, but it should be more of a sure bet. And that's kind of why I like the idea of Puka, who I think is a pretty sure bet, and then Rome, who I think will be a sure bet. So that was kind of where my head's at. So, all right, I think that covers us pretty well. Andy, hopefully if you're listening to this, you got some good advice. You got some good pieces to build around. We like what you've done already. We like the picks that you've assembled. I think that you've got the kind of team that can go either way. And depending on your record, you might be able to swing something weird this year and make a playoff run, because it's anybody's game, man. I mean, this is the kind of season we talked about it. Pat and I talked about it before. This is the kind of year where you really can't predict what's going to happen. So just hang on tight, make trades where you can, have fun every week. You know, it's not meant to be a chore. It's not meant to be something you hate doing. It's not meant to be something that causes you stress in life. There's plenty of that out there. We're here to distract from that. We're here to make your life more fun and to kind of keep things moving forward. So hopefully, even though you're a junkie, you're out there having fun with this addiction you've created, and can at least have a good time with the rest of the way this world goes. So, Pat, before we get out of here, why don't you tell people where they can find you? I don't think we went through it at the beginning because we just kind of got into it. But where can people find you, and what all do you have going on this season?
Yeah, people can find me on Twitter at Fitz_FF. Be sure to check out all the good stuff at fantasypros.com. And, I'm making regular appearances, I think 4 a week on the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast. So be sure to find me there. We have a waiver wire show that drops every Monday, a ranking show, a start sit show, a burning question show at the end of the week. That's kind of a fun thing. Yeah, that's it. And guys, thanks so much for having me, Andrew, Scott. It's always great to see you guys and talk to you. So
I always appreciate your advice,
the
Pat.
invitation.
Oh yeah, anytime. I know you're a busy man with all those shows and all those articles. I know you mentioned before you're doing prop bets and stuff now too. I'm sure for betting pros and all that. Like, just never stops, right? It just always goes. That's the way to be. I love it.
Yeah, I mean, you can mix business and pleasure. Never anything wrong with that. It's always a good feeling.
That's right. That's right. If you do what you love, you never work a day in your life, right? That kind of thing. All right. So Scott, why don't you, say goodbye and tell people where they can find you, but then also, get us out of here like we're used to doing. It's that kind of night.
Yeah, all friends of the show over there at Fantasy Pros. I mean, from Pat and Pisa Pia, Bogman, and all the guys, Dynasty Show and everything. I mean, we got all those guys.
Too, yeah.
So, everyone I think has been on here multiple times. So
we got to get D-Bro still. That's the one I don't think
D-Bro's on the list,
just
baby.
Remember that. Yeah.
It's on the list. We brought you a heavy hitter tonight. We're gonna have some more coming. So
I'll get him. I just keep forgetting. That's my bad.
He'll do it. He's a junkie. He's a junkie. So with that, find me at trades. Appreciate your submission here, Andy, and definitely want to keep those coming in. So you can find it at our Dynasty Junkies Twitter. I believe it's pinned. It's our pinned tweet. So at Dynasty Junkies, you can find the link there. Fill it out. Get on the sheet. Definitely do another all FMAT episode this time of year. A couple we generally do during season, so we shall do that. So appreciate the homies in the chat, all the listeners. You guys are amazing. Questions, the conversations this time of year. It's a lot of fun. The trades are coming through. It's makes for a great show. We love it. So we appreciate you guys. You can find Rocky at Dynasty FF Addict. You can find Andrew at Andrew Hall FF. I'm at Scott_Sidlow. Of course, follow DAP Network at DAP Network. Subscribe, rate, and review if you can. Really help us out. And let's find some more junkies to connect with. And for Pat, for Andrew, I'm Scott. Junkies out.